Under the endless dark sky of a lonely colony world, Commander Ellis stood at the edge of the communication tower, watching the distant fires rise beyond the horizon. The night was broken by flashes of orange and red, burning settlements that once held laughter, families, and peace. The colony had been built only 5 years ago, a quiet home for scientists and settlers who wanted a life far from the crowded inner worlds. They had farms, schools, and dreams of growing old under twin suns. But that dream had ended the moment the invaders arrived. They came without warning, ships cutting through the sky like blades. No one had ever seen anything like them. They were not raiders or pirates. They were organized, efficient, and ruthless. Within hours, communication towers fell, defense turrets were destroyed, and hundreds of civilians were captured or killed. The local security force fought bravely, but their weapons were outdated, their training weak compared to the attackers' cold precision. Ellis, once a fleet engineer turned colonial commander, had never imagined leading people into war. His job had been logistics, not survival. But when the first attack hit, he found himself standing in front of frightened settlers trying to keep order, trying to give them something to hold on to. Every hour, more systems went offline: energy grids, transport links, oxygen controls. The planet itself seemed to be falling apart. He gathered the remaining technicians inside the central communication dome. It was one of the last structures still standing. Inside, the air smelled of burned circuits and sweat. The team was exhausted, faces pale, hands trembling. Ellis spoke quietly, his voice heavy but steady. "We're not dead yet," he said. "As long as this tower stands, we have a chance." They worked through the night, patching damaged panels and reprogramming satellite links. The invaders had jammed most standard frequencies, leaving only fragments of open channels. Every attempt to reach the human command network ended in static. The only thing they could send were short-coded bursts, messages that might reach someone somewhere if luck was on their side. Outside, explosions shook the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling, lights flickered, but Ellis refused to stop. He looked at a photo taped beside the console, a picture of the colony's founding day. Children smiling, banners flying, the sky clear. He wondered how many of those faces were still alive. Hours passed. One by one, the technicians collapsed from exhaustion. Ellis stayed at the terminal, manually entering coordinates, adjusting frequencies. He felt the weight of the planet pressing down on him. The sound of the wind outside mixed with distant screams and the sharp thud of artillery. Every moment reminded him that time was running out. Finally, as dawn began to rise, a single bar of signal strength appeared on the screen. It was weak, almost useless, but it was something. Ellis stared at it, hardly believing. "We've got a window," one of the young operators whispered. "It's unstable, but it might hold." Ellis took a deep breath. His throat was dry, his voice cracked, but he began to record. "This is Commander Ellis of Colony Epsilon 3, he said slowly, choosing every word with care. "We are under attack. Civilians are dying. We have no defenses left, please. If anyone can hear this, we need help." He paused for a moment, then repeated the message in several emergency codes, hoping at least one would slip through the jamming fields. When he finished, he pressed transmit. The tower hummed, lights flickered, and a faint pulse of energy rippled through the night sky. They watched as the signal vanished into space. It was impossible to know where it would go, whether it would reach a nearby station or be lost forever in the void. Still, it was something to believe in. Afterward, silence filled the room. No one spoke for a long time. Ellis looked around at the faces of his crew, young, scared, but holding on. "That's it," he said softly. "That's all we can do." One of the technicians, a woman named Kara, wiped tears from her eyes. "What if no one comes?" she whispered. Ellis didn't answer right away. He turned toward the cracked window, watching smoke rise from what had once been their main square. In the distance, the invaders' ships moved like dark shadows across the pale morning sky. "Then we fight," he finally said. "We hold on as long as we can." They stayed in the dome for hours, monitoring the weak signal. Every so often, the system would flicker, and they'd adjust the frequency again. There was no sign of a reply. No confirmation. No promise that anyone was listening. Outside, chaos continued. The colony's main fuel depot exploded in a thunderous wave, shaking the tower. People ran for cover, crying out for loved ones. The attackers seemed to be taking prisoners now, gathering survivors into transport ships. Ellis knew they wouldn't be able to hold out much longer. He went outside to see for himself. The air was thick with smoke and ash drifted like snow. The once green fields were blackened. The research domes shattered. He saw a group of children hiding behind a broken wall, clinging to each other. One of them looked up at him, eyes wide and hollow. Something inside Ellis hardened. He couldn't let them die for nothing. He returned to the tower, determined to boost the signal again. "We're going to repeat the message," he said. "Keep it looping until we're destroyed or until someone answers." The team didn't argue. They just nodded and began their work. As night fell again, the transmission continued, soft, steady, and desperate. Over and over, the same words echoed through the void. "We are under attack. Please help us." Somewhere far away, across hundreds of light years, that signal traveled through the dark. It bounced from satellite to satellite, slipping past interference, threading through forgotten relay points. It was faint, broken, and filled with static, but it was still human. Ellis didn't sleep that night. He sat by the console, listening to the hum of the machines, watching the signal strength fluctuate. He thought about the stories he had heard as a cadet, stories about the Deathworlders, the soldiers born on the most dangerous planets. They were legendary, tough, fearless, often considered myths. He wondered if they were real, and if they were, would they even care about a small colony like his? By morning, the invaders were closing in. Ellis could see their ground units approaching through the smoke. The sky above was filled with dark shapes, ships preparing for the final strike. The tower's power was almost gone. He looked at his exhausted crew and smiled weakly. "We did everything we could," he said. "Now we wait." He pressed his hand against the console, feeling the vibration of the last transmission leaving the planet. It was like sending a message in a bottle into a cosmic ocean, hopeless yet necessary. He whispered to himself, "Please, someone hear us." The moment the last transmission went out, the power core failed. The lights dimmed, the hum faded, and the tower went silent. Outside, the sky burned again. No one in that room knew that their signal had reached farther than anyone imagined. No one knew that light years away, a fleet of Deathworlder warships had just received the message. And as Ellis stood watching the horizon turn to fire, he still believed they were alone. But far beyond the stars, engines began to roar to life, and warriors who had survived the deadliest worlds in existence were already preparing to answer the call. The signal that Commander Ellis sent traveled quietly through the dark emptiness of space, crossing 1,000 dead frequencies and broken satellites. It was weak, almost lost, but it carried one clear message, a human voice asking for help. Across distant systems, the message echoed for days, sometimes lost in static, sometimes repeating faintly before fading again. Most stations ignored it, assuming it was old data or a broken transmission from a forgotten world. But then, by chance, it reached one channel that was always listening, the long-range receiver of the Deathworlder fleet stationed at the edge of human territory. Inside the main communication chamber of the fleet's flagship, Iron Vow, a young officer named Lieutenant Mara was the first to hear it. She was monitoring dozens of encrypted channels when a faint signal appeared on her screen. The words were hard to make out at first, covered by noise, but the tone of the voice stopped her hand in mid-air. It was not a machine or a recording. It was real. She increased the volume, adjusted the filters, and finally heard it clearly. "This is Commander Ellis of Colony Epsilon 3. We are under attack. Civilians are dying, please. If anyone can hear this, we need help." Mara froze. She ran the signal through multiple checks. The location, the pattern, the source code. It was authentic. It came from a human colony that had gone dark months ago, officially marked as lost communication. She knew what that meant. Most abandoned colonies were written off quietly. Help never came because the government couldn't afford to send fleets to every edge world. But this message was still active. Someone was still alive. She immediately forwarded the signal to the command deck. Within minutes, Admiral Kira Voss, the commander of the Deathworlder fleet, was listening to it herself. Voss was a tall, calm woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that had seen too many battles. She listened without moving, her face expressionless as the desperate plea repeated again and again. Around her, officers waited silently, knowing what the message meant. When it ended, the room fell into heavy silence. Captain Dren, her second-in-command, broke the quiet. "That's Epsilon 3, Admiral. The colony was marked inactive 4 months ago. No response to any check-in. Officially abandoned. Abandoned. Voss repeated softly, her tone bitter. And now they're dying because of it. Another officer hesitated. Command won't authorize a rescue. It's too far. Too risky. And we're still repairing after the last campaign. Voss looked at him, and in that moment every person in the room went still. Her gaze had the weight of authority earned through blood and survival. They asked for help, she said. That's enough. Dren leaned forward, lowering his voice. You know what this means, Admiral. If we move without orders, they'll call it insubordination. Voss didn't answer immediately. She turned back to the screen, where the frozen words of Ellis's message were still displayed. Her mind drifted for a moment, back to her own homeworld, one of the original Deathworlds, a place where storms could tear metal apart where only the strongest survived. She remembered the day her people sent a call for help when their cities were burning. No one came then. No one answered their plea. That memory had shaped her entire life. She would not let another call go unanswered. Prepare the fleet, she said finally. Her voice was calm, but everyone in the room felt the storm behind it. We're going. The bridge erupted into motion. Orders flew across the decks as pilots ran to their ships and engineers powered up dormant engines. The iron vow trembled as reactors came alive, glowing like the heart of a giant beast. Across the sector, massive warships began to move, shadows of steel and fire waking from their rest. While preparations continued, Voss sent a short message to Central Command, responding to distress signal from Epsilon 3. Immediate action required. She knew it would take days for any reply to arrive, and when it did, it would likely contain one word: denied. But by then, they would already be gone. In the lower decks, soldiers gathered in briefing halls, checking weapons and gear. They were called Deathworlders because they came from planets that tried to kill them every day. Worlds filled with poison air, violent storms, and creatures that hunted humans for sport. Their training was not learned in academies. It was born in survival. To outsiders, they were terrifying, fierce, unpredictable, even monstrous. But to those who knew them, they were protectors of the last kind. Lieutenant Mara moved through the corridors, watching as the crew prepared for launch. She felt a strange mix of fear and pride. Every person here knew what this mission meant. It wasn't about politics or territory or glory. It was about answering a voice that cried out in the dark. Hours later, the fleet assembled in formation. 27 ships, each larger than a city block, hovered above the barren moon where they had been stationed. Their hulls were scarred from past wars, marked with the names of fallen comrades. In the command tower of the Iron Vow, Admiral Voss stood before the viewing window looking out at her fleet. Captain Dren stepped beside her. Engines are ready. Jump coordinates calculated. Once we enter the Epsilon sector, we'll be out of range of command's control. Good, she said. Let's keep it that way. Dren hesitated. You really think someone's still alive down there? Voss nodded slowly. I do, because someone had the strength to send that message. And if they had the strength to do that, they're worth saving. With a silent hand motion, she gave the order. In the next moment, space itself seemed to split open. The fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only streaks of light and echoes of thunder. Inside the ship, soldiers braced themselves as the stars bent and twisted around them. The jump would take several hours, but none of them slept. They all knew the risk. If the colony had already fallen, they might be walking into a trap. But it didn't matter. To the Deathworlders, the call for help was sacred. Meanwhile, far away on the other side of the galaxy, the bureaucrats in Central Command finally received Voss's message. When the officers read it, they exchanged nervous glances. She's disobeyed a direct order, one said. If she goes through with this, she'll lose her command. The admiral of the human fleet sighed heavily. That woman never did care about orders, he said. She cares about people. But even he knew there would be consequences. The Deathworlders had always been different. Too independent, too dangerous, too loyal to their own code. Back aboard the Iron Vow, the fleet emerged from hyperspace with a burst of blue light. Before them stretched the Epsilon system, cold, silent, and filled with debris. The moment they dropped out of jump, scanners came alive. The screens filled with red signals. Enemy ships orbiting the colony world. Multiple hostiles detected, reported Mara. Ground assault in progress. Life readings. Faint but still present. Voss's jaw tightened. They're still fighting, she said softly. Get us in range. Deploy drop units. The fleet began to move, massive engines lighting the darkness. The Deathworlders were coming, not as invaders, but as saviors born from the harshest corners of the galaxy. Down on the planet, Commander Ellis and his team were still hiding inside the half-destroyed communication dome. The signal had gone silent hours ago, the power completely gone. They had almost given up hope. Then, through the dust-choked air, the sky suddenly flashed. At first, Ellis thought it was another enemy attack, but the light kept growing, white and fierce, spreading across the clouds. And then he saw it, the silhouette of enormous ships descending through the atmosphere, their metal hulls gleaming like stars reborn. He fell to his knees, whispering to himself, "Someone heard us." Above, Admiral Voss stood on the command bridge, watching the burning world below. "Prepare for combat," she said. "No mercy for those who prey on the weak." The Deathworlders' engines roared like thunder as they broke through the clouds, their weapons locking onto enemy targets. The plea for help had not vanished into the void. It had awakened the most feared force in the galaxy. The Deathworlders were on their way, and war was coming with them. The first thing the people on Colony Epsilon 3 saw was the light. The dark, smoky sky suddenly split open with streaks of fire and silver, and for a moment everyone froze where they stood. Some thought it was another wave of enemy ships. Others thought it was the end. But then, as the light grew brighter, they realized it was something different, something powerful, something human. The Deathworlders had arrived. Commander Ellis stood on the cracked steps of the old research dome, his face covered in dust and blood. His eyes lifted toward the sky, where massive shapes moved behind the clouds. They were enormous warships, black, scarred, and marked with symbols of old battles. The air trembled as their engines roared, making the ground shake beneath his feet. The enemy soldiers stopped firing for a moment, looking up in confusion and fear. They had never seen ships like these. Above the planet, the Deathworlder fleet moved into attack formation. Admiral Kira Voss stood in the command deck of the Iron Vow, her gaze fixed on the screen showing enemy positions. Her voice was calm but filled with strength. "Target all enemy command vessels," she said. "We end this fast." "Confirmed," replied her weapons officer. "All guns ready." The Admiral raised her hand, and for a brief moment the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Then she gave the order that would change everything. Fire. The silence was broken by a thunder that shook the heavens. The fleet's cannons unleashed waves of energy that cut through space like lightning. Massive beams of light struck the enemy ships in orbit, tearing them apart in seconds. Flames and debris scattered across the sky, painting the darkness with explosions. On the ground, the colonists watched in disbelief as the invaders' airships began to fall from the clouds, crashing into the forests and mountains around them. The soldiers who had been so fearless before now screamed and ran for cover. The balance had changed completely in just a few minutes. Commander Ellis felt tears in his eyes as he watched the impossible happen. "They came," he whispered. "They actually came." At that same moment, several dropships broke away from the fleet and descended toward the surface. Each one carried squads of Deathworlder soldiers, warriors born on planets where everything tried to kill them. Their armor was dark and heavy, their weapons designed for survival and destruction. When they landed, the ground shook beneath their boots. The first dropship opened with a hiss, releasing a cloud of steam. Out stepped a tall figure with a scar across her face and the symbol of the Deathworlders etched into her shoulder plate. Her name was Major Rian Holt, one of Admiral Voss's most trusted officers. She looked around at the burning colony, at the terrified survivors hiding behind walls, and at the advancing enemy forces regrouping in the distance. Her voice came through her helmet speakers, strong and sharp. "No one touches these people," she said. "Not while we're here." The Deathworlders spread out like a storm. Their weapons flashed through the smoke, every shot hitting with perfect precision. They didn't fight like normal soldiers. They moved like predators, fast, silent, and unstoppable. The enemy's plasma fire hit their armor but barely slowed them down. Each step they took pushed the invaders back, farther and farther, until the once dominant attackers were the ones running for their lives. Ellis ran to join the group of colonists who were taking shelter near the medical bay. "Stay down," he shouted as another explosion ripped through the street. But when he turned to look toward the battlefield, he saw something he would never forget. One Deathworlder soldier stood in the open, holding a massive energy shield that glowed bright blue. Around him, several civilians were crawling to safety. Enemy fire rained down, but the soldier didn't move an inch. He took every hit, his armor glowing from the heat, until the last civilian reached the shelter. Then with one swing of his arm he threw a grenade that exploded in a burst of white fire, wiping out an entire squad of enemies. The colonists began to cheer. For the first time since the invasion began, hope returned to their hearts. Up above, in orbit, the Iron Vow and the rest of the fleet were still engaged in fierce combat. Enemy reinforcements had arrived, smaller ships darting in and out, trying to hit the Deathworlders' flanks. But the fleet's gunners were ready. Their targeting systems were old, but their skill was unmatched. They fought like people who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Admiral Voss watched the chaos unfold with cold focus. "Report," she said. "Enemy fleet collapsing," replied her officer. "Their flagship is breaking apart. We're detecting escape pods launching." "Don't waste fire on them," Voss said. "The ground is our priority. Get me a direct link to Holt." Within seconds, Major Holt's voice came through the speakers. "We've secured the north and west sectors, Admiral. Civilians are safe, but the central district is still crawling with hostiles. Take them alive if possible," Voss ordered. "If not, you know what to do." "Understood." Holt switched off the comm and turned to her soldiers. "We're pushing to the center. Move." They advanced through burning streets, each explosion lighting the dark sky above. The enemy tried to regroup, setting up barricades, but they were no match for the Deathworlders. The colonists who had been hiding began to come out of their shelters, watching in awe as the impossible unfolded before them. In the middle of the chaos, Ellis found himself running beside Holt's team, guiding them toward the remaining civilians. "There are still families trapped in the school sector," he shouted. "Show us the way," Holt replied, reloading her weapon. They moved quickly, cutting through smoke and rubble. Ellis pointed to a half-collapsed building ahead. "They're in there!" Holt nodded, signaling her squad. "Cover me!" She rushed forward, smashing through a fallen door. Inside, a group of children and their teacher huddled in the dark. Holt knelt beside them, her armor still glowing with heat. "You're safe now," she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "We're taking you home." When they stepped outside again, Ellis saw the enemy forces retreating toward the mountains. Dropships from the Deathworlder fleet chased them, firing precise shots that left trails of fire across the landscape. It was over. The enemy was broken, but even in victory, the scene was filled with pain. The colony was nearly destroyed. Homes were gone, streets were filled with debris, and the air smelled of ash and metal. Deathworlder medics moved through the ruins, helping the wounded, repairing what they could. Ellis walked through the wreckage in silence. His legs felt weak, but his heart was heavy with gratitude. He saw Deathworlder soldiers giving food to crying children, using their own water supplies to clean wounds, lifting collapsed beams with their bare hands. These were not the monsters people in the central systems had described. They were protectors, fierce and human in the truest sense. In orbit, Admiral Voss watched the final enemy ship explode in the distance. Her crew cheered, but she didn't smile. She knew the cost that came with every victory. "Signal the ground teams," she said quietly. "Tell them it's done." The message reached Major Holt's comm system. She removed her helmet, her face covered in soot, and looked toward the sunrise breaking through the smoke. "It's over," she said softly. Ellis turned to her. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. His voice cracked with emotion. "You don't have to," Holt replied. "You called for help," we answered. Around them, survivors began to gather, embracing one another, some crying, some laughing in disbelief. The sound of relief spread across the colony like music. The Deathworlders had not only saved them, they had reminded them what hope felt like. As the fleet began to land more ships to provide aid, Ellis looked up at the sky one last time. The giant silhouettes of the Deathworlder vessels hovered above, shining faintly in the dawn. For the first time in weeks, he felt warmth instead of fear. Far above on the Iron Vow, Admiral Voss watched the colony below through the viewing window. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, battle-worn but proud. She whispered to herself, "You're safe now, Commander. Your message reached us." And as the sunlight touched the shattered world, the Deathworlders stood among the survivors, silent and strong, like guardians who had come out of legend. The plea for help had been answered, and the galaxy would remember this day, the day the Deathworlders came. The victory on Colony Epsilon 3 was complete, but it was not without cost. The ground, once filled with life, was now scarred and blackened. Buildings that had stood for years lay in rubble, and the air smelled of smoke, metal, and fear. The colonists, still trembling from the recent battle, began emerging from their hiding places, their faces etched with relief and disbelief. They had survived, but everything they knew and loved had been changed forever. Commander Ellis moved carefully through the ruins, his boots crunching on broken glass and twisted metal. Around him, his people were crying, hugging one another, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He could hardly believe that the Deathworlders had come. Their arrival had been sudden, overwhelming, and terrifying in the best way. Their soldiers were unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering figures, strong and relentless, yet protective of the weakest. He spotted a group of Deathworlder medics moving among the survivors. They carried portable medical kits, carefully treating burns, cuts, and broken bones. The medics' movements were quick, precise, and efficient, almost mechanical, yet their gestures were gentle. They spoke softly to the frightened colonists, calming them with words in a language both familiar and strange, their heavy accents softened by kindness. Ellis felt a swell of gratitude that was almost too deep to express. Major Holt walked beside him, her armor still marked with the signs of battle. She had just returned from the central sector, where the last pockets of enemy forces had been destroyed. Her face was streaked with soot and blood, but her eyes were calm and steady, observing the survivors with the same careful attention she had given the battlefield. She had seen many colonies fall in her lifetime, and she understood that survival came with scars, both visible and hidden. Ellis led Holt to the communication dome, the structure that had once been their lifeline and now their only hope of rebuilding contact with the outside universe. Inside, a few technicians were working to repair the damaged equipment, trying desperately to restore a link to nearby human systems. The consoles were battered, their screens cracked, but with the Deathworlders' help, they would soon be operational again. Holt crouched beside one of the young engineers. "We'll get this working," she said firmly, her voice carrying authority but also reassurance. "We'll make sure the world knows you're alive. Outside." The rest of the Deathworlder squads were surveying the surrounding area, securing the perimeter, and assisting the colonists with whatever they needed. Some helped carry water to families, while others cleared debris blocking escape routes. The soldiers moved with an efficiency that was almost eerie, but their actions spoke louder than words. They were here to protect, not to conquer. Despite the relief, there was grief. Every corner of the colony told a story of loss. Homes that had been filled with laughter were reduced to ashes. Stores that had supplied food and medicine for years were gone. The central square, once the heart of community gatherings, was now a crater filled with rubble. Ellis walked through it all, feeling a weight on his chest. He had asked for help and it had arrived, but the price had been high. He saw a group of children sitting in a circle, hugging each other tightly. They had lost family members, friends, and teachers. One small boy looked up at him with wide eyes, his face streaked with tears and dirt. "Will it be like this forever?" he asked softly. Ellis knelt beside him, struggling to find words. "No," he said finally, "we will rebuild, and we will be safe, thanks to those who came for us." Above them, the Deathworlder fleet remained in orbit, ready to respond if needed. Admiral Voss watched the world below from the bridge of the Iron Vow, her expression unreadable. She knew that even though the immediate threat was gone, the work had only begun. Rebuilding a colony was never easy, especially one that had suffered such devastation. Supplies, infrastructure, and security would all be necessary, and the survivors were fragile, both physically and emotionally. Voss signaled to her communications officer. "Keep monitoring the sector," she ordered. "We may have neutralized the immediate threat, but we need to ensure they can rebuild safely." Meanwhile, on the ground, Ellis and Holt walked among the survivors, assessing their condition. They spoke quietly to families, helping them find shelter, providing reassurance and ensuring that everyone had basic necessities. For many colonists, the Deathworlders were no longer just legendary warriors. They were saviors, beings of myth and reality combined. The presence of the Deathworlders had also brought discipline and structure to the chaos. Soldiers organized groups of survivors to clear debris, set up temporary shelters, and distribute food and water. They worked without complaint, guiding the colonists in rebuilding their immediate environment. Every action, every command was calculated to maximize safety and efficiency while minimizing additional trauma. Ellis paused to observe one small group of Deathworlder soldiers assisting a family who had been trapped under a collapsed building. The soldiers lifted heavy beams with ease, carefully pulling the family to safety. The parents clutched their children, whispering thanks repeatedly, but the soldiers only nodded and moved on to the next group. There was no arrogance in their actions, only the quiet assurance that they were here to protect. As night fell over the colony, the survivors began to settle into temporary shelters. Fires burned in controlled areas, and the soldiers patrolled in small groups, ensuring no hostile remnants remained. Ellis stood on a hill overlooking the colony, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion, relief, and lingering fear. He could finally breathe, but he knew the memory of the attack would linger for years. Holt approached him, her armor dusty and dented from the day's work. "They'll survive," she said simply. "You've got a strong group here, and now they have the protection they need." Ellis nodded, watching as a few children played cautiously in the cleared streets, laughing for the first time since the attack. "Thanks to you," he said. Holt smiled faintly, a rare softness in her expression. "We only answered a call for help," she replied. "That's all any of us did." The next few days were filled with rebuilding and tending to the wounded. The Deathworlders stayed long enough to ensure the colony was secure and had the means to contact outside help. They distributed supplies, repaired damaged infrastructure, and trained the colonists in basic defensive tactics to prevent future attacks. Every action reinforced the bond between the warriors and those they had saved. Through it all, Ellis began to see a transformation in his people. Fear was gradually replaced by determination. Tears were replaced by cautious smiles. The survivors began working together, guided by the example set by the Deathworlders. They realized that even in the darkest times, help could arrive, and survival was possible with courage and unity. Eventually, the fleet prepared to depart. The Deathworlders did not linger to accept thanks or accolades. Their mission was complete, and their presence was always meant to be temporary. As the massive ships lifted off and disappeared into the sky, the colonists stood silently watching. They knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would be remembered for generations. Ellis stood with Holt one last time before she left. "Will we see you again?" he asked. "Perhaps," she said. "But for now, your world is yours again. Protect it." And with that, the fleet vanished into the stars, leaving behind a colony that had been scarred by war but not defeated. The survivors had endured the unthinkable and learned that even in a universe filled with danger, courage, and the willingness to answer a plea for help could bring salvation. As night fell and the first stars appeared in the clear sky above, Ellis looked at the rebuilt shelters, the cautious laughter of children, and the determined faces of adults working together. For the first time in weeks, he felt hope. The Deathworlders had come, fought, and departed, but their impact would remain forever. The plea for help had been answered, and the survivors were ready to face whatever came next. After the Deathworlders had departed, Colony Epsilon 3 was left in a quiet, almost surreal calm. The air, once thick with smoke and the echoes of battle, was now filled with the soft hum of survival. Survivors moved cautiously through the wreckage, still adjusting to the idea that they were safe. The sky, clear for the first time in weeks, stretched overhead, dotted with stars that seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself acknowledged their survival. Commander Ellis walked through the streets, surveying the work that had already begun. The colony was far from restored, but the people had started organizing themselves, inspired by the actions of the Deathworlders. Families rebuilt temporary shelters from rubble, while groups of young adults carried supplies from the drops left by the fleet. There was a quiet determination in the air, a sense that life, though altered forever, could continue. Ellis paused by a partially collapsed building where a group of children had gathered, carefully placing stones to mark a small play area. Their laughter, though cautious, was a melody he hadn't heard in weeks. He knelt beside them and smiled. "This will grow again," he said softly. "It may not look like before, but it will grow." The survivors had begun to tell their stories, recounting the moments when the Deathworlders appeared like shadows from a legend, striking with unthinkable speed and precision. Children spoke of the towering figures that carried them from burning buildings, while adults described the calm authority of the soldiers, who moved through chaos as though they were part of it, but never threatened the innocent. Ellis listened, realizing that these stories were not just memories. They were lessons in courage, survival, and humanity. Outside the central dome, engineers worked to restore the communication arrays. They were connecting the colony to nearby systems to request aid, medical supplies, and reconstruction equipment. Each repaired console was a small victory, a symbol that the colony was reclaiming its future. Ellis watched as Kara, the young technician who had helped send the original distress signal, adjusted the delicate circuits with steady hands. "It's strange," she said, glancing at him. "After everything, it feels like we're finally being heard." Ellis nodded. He remembered the fear in her eyes the first night of the invasion, and now, watching her skillfully repair the equipment, he felt a profound sense of pride. "Yes," he said, "and now we have a voice that cannot be ignored." Though the immediate danger had passed, the colony faced many challenges. The infrastructure was destroyed, crops had been burned, and clean water was scarce. But the Deathworlders had left more than just supplies. They had left a sense of order, teaching the colonists how to prioritize safety, manage resources, and care for one another. Ellis realized that this guidance, combined with the community's determination, would allow them to rebuild stronger than before. As days turned into weeks, the colony slowly transformed. Temporary shelters were replaced with more stable structures. Fields were cleared and replanted, and water purification systems began to function again. The survivors had learned resilience through the ordeal, guided by the example of the warriors who had saved them. Stories of the Deathworlders spread among the people, transforming fear into admiration and despair into hope. Ellis often returned to the spot where he had sent the original distress signal, a small hill overlooking the central square. From there he could see the work of the survivors, their movements purposeful, their spirits unbroken. He reflected on the chain of events that had led to this moment, the desperation, the fear, the plea for help that had reached across light years, and the arrival of the Deathworlders. It was a story that would never be forgotten. Though the Deathworlders had left, their influence remained. The colonists had adopted new techniques for defense and survival, strategies they had observed during the battle. Children learned quickly, practicing drills under the guidance of adults who had trained with the soldiers. It was a delicate balance of vigilance and normalcy, but it gave the colony a sense of security and empowerment. Ellis also began documenting the events, creating records of what had happened and who had been saved. He wrote about the bravery of the Deathworlders, their tactical skill, and their unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent. His words captured not only the facts but the emotions of the survivors, the terror, the relief, and the awe. These records would serve as a testament to the events, ensuring that no one would forget the day the plea for help had been answered. One evening, as the twin suns set and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ellis walked among the settlers. He stopped to watch a small group working to repair a water pump, their laughter mingling with the soft hum of machinery. He felt a deep sense of accomplishment mixed with humility. They had survived a nightmare, and now, through their collective effort, they were reclaiming their world. The memory of the Deathworlders was everywhere, not just in stories or in gratitude, but in the lessons they had left behind. Survivors spoke of discipline, courage, and compassion. The colony began to operate with a new sense of unity, people working together not just out of necessity, but out of a shared understanding of what it meant to be protected and valued. Ellis agreed. The Deathworlders showed us that help can come when it is needed most. Now it is our turn to ensure that we are never helpless again. The colony's recovery was slow, but it was steady. Supplies from nearby systems arrived, medical facilities were established, and schools reopened. The people began to form new communities within the ruins, finding hope in the act of rebuilding. And through it all, the memory of the warriors who had saved them remained vivid, a reminder of courage, discipline, and the power of answering a call for help. In the months that followed, the colony began to thrive. Crops flourished, children played freely, and new structures replaced the ruins of the past. Commander Ellis continued to lead, now not just as a protector but as a guide, ensuring that the lessons of survival and unity were passed down to all who lived there. One day, as he walked through the central square, he saw a small plaque that had been erected by the colonists. It bore a simple inscription: "When one calls for help, someone will answer." He paused, letting the words sink in. It was a message not only to the future generations of the colony, but to the universe itself, a reminder of the day the Deathworlders had come. Though the fleet had left, the bond they had created with the colony remained. Survivors looked to the stars, knowing that somewhere out there, guardians watched over them, ready to answer if called upon again. Ellis often looked up as well, feeling a quiet gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. He understood that their survival was not just the result of luck, but of courage, determination, and the willingness of others to act when it mattered most. The story of Colony Epsilon 3 and the Deathworlders spread beyond their system. Word traveled through the human territories, inspiring hope in worlds that had faced despair. People told the tale of the plea for help and the arrival of the warriors with reverence, passing it on as both warning and inspiration. The Deathworlders' actions had not only saved a colony, but had sparked belief that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, help could arrive. Ellis continued his work, guiding the colony with the wisdom gained from experience and the lessons learned from their saviors. He trained others to take responsibility, to lead with courage, and to value the lives around them. Slowly but surely, Colony Epsilon 3 became a symbol of resilience, a testament to what humanity could endure and achieve when aided by those who dared to act selflessly. Years later, children born after the attack would hear stories of the battle, the arrival of the Deathworlders, and the desperate plea that had summoned them. They would learn that even in a galaxy full of danger and uncertainty, courage and hope could change the course of history. The plaque in the central square remained a reminder that one voice calling out for help had the power to reach across the stars and awaken forces beyond imagination. Commander Ellis stood once again on the hill overlooking the colony. The buildings were rebuilt, the streets were alive with activity, and the people had learned to thrive again. The sky above was calm, filled with stars, and he thought of Admiral Voss and the Deathworlders, wondering where they were now and if they were watching over other worlds. He smiled quietly. The plea for help had been answered, and the echo of that moment would last forever. The colony was no longer just a place of survival. It had become a place of hope, a living reminder that even in the darkest times, courage and compassion could shine across the universe. Ellis turned back to the people below, now busy in their daily lives, rebuilding and thriving. The sounds of laughter, conversation, and activity filled the air, blending with the soft hum of the repaired communication towers. For the first time in months, he felt a deep peace. The Deathworlders had come, fought, and left, but their presence had changed everything. The colony had been saved, not only by their strength, but by the bravery of those who dared to call for help and the warriors who answered. And as night fell over Colony Epsilon 3, the stars above seemed to shine with a quiet brilliance, as if the universe itself remembered the day a desperate plea had summoned the most feared fleet in the galaxy, and how that fleet had become the saviors of the helpless, the hope of the lost, and the guardians of life in a universe full of danger.